Mining has been an important part of South Africa's economy for decades. However, communities surrounding mining operations are often excluded from important decisions on matters that have direct environmental impact on them. These mining companies often fail to comply with codes and policies which govern them. We speak to Dr. Ross Harvey from Good Governance Africa about what it means to mine in fragile environments. Good evening, and thank you so much for your time tonight. I want us to begin with just that. What does it mean to mine in fragile environments?
Good evening, Bongi. Thank you for having me on the show. What it means essentially is that there are many contexts in which the mining policy environment is fragile, as well as the operating environment. In other words, there are places in which it is difficult to do business responsibly, and those contexts, especially when policy is unstable or unclear, we find irresponsible players moving into that space and creating the kind of havoc that you've just been speaking about.
Mm. And I mean, when we talk about the fragility of, some of these mining spaces, and we have been seeing, not only fragility in terms of the minerals themselves and some of the policies that are then not adhered to, but there's also, some of the activists that are finding themselves opposing some of these decisions by some of these companies to come and mine there and finding themselves being killed, and mining companies bulldozing their way in there without the community's buy-in.
Yes, Bongi, this is a very serious problem. And in fact, what happens often, and we have had cases like this in South Africa, unfortunately, where mining companies find it expedient to strike a deal with the Department of Mineral Resources and perhaps the local chief, and the decisions that are taken end up being at the expense and in the contrary interests of the local community itself. And so we saw this, for instance, in the case of Olobeni, and the community spoke out and said, we're not interested in mining companies stripping our future. In other words, we're not interested in mining companies stripping our coastal dunes, because these are the grounds on which we may have future ecotourism potential to generate revenue. A mine is a very short-term operation and invariably leaves a hole in the ground. Now, at Good Governance Africa, we are very dedicated to encouraging mining companies and governments to encourage responsible mining. In other words, we recognize that mining is a necessity. We will have to mine minerals and metals to feed the transport and energy revolutions that are moving us towards a low carbon growth trajectory. But in that process, it cannot be that the natural environment and local communities themselves become casualties in the process. That doesn't work for anyone. What we're after is for mining to become a catalyst for broad-based sustainable development. And too often that doesn't happen, precisely because the institutional arrangements that govern mining have not been properly thought through, and nor have they been implemented in the way that they were designed in spirit.
And when we then look at, of course, the concerns around, as you say, responsible mining and how it's important to have communities form part of these critical discussions, it certainly is something that is not new. We've been talking about it for years now. How then do these communities ensure that government does not leave them out, and even some of those that they account to, either a chief or whoever is the authority in that particular area, does not continue, to leave them out of these particular critical discussions? Because at the end of the day, it is also these communities that also then sometimes may fall ill as a result of some of the things that are being mined underground.
Yeah, absolutely, Bungiwe. So we do often see this, and invariably for communities, it's a hard fight. And I think that the time has come where we actually have to say, look, the onus cannot be simply on communities to defend their best welfare interests. In fact, investors and companies have to start taking responsibility, and there have to be real repercussions. There has to be a real deterrent to prevent companies from behaving in an irresponsible way. Now, part of the way in which we do that is that at an investment level, we have to punish companies that do not adhere to the strictest codes, that do not take environmental and social governance seriously. And there has to be divestment from companies that do not conform to the spirit of the matter. There are many that comply and can easily tick a box. That's not the point. The point is that environmental and social governance becomes embedded in the ethos of the companies that operate, especially on our continent. And then secondly, we have to ensure that mining codes are not simply things that are written on paper, but actually have de facto credibility that mining companies adhere to and that governments take seriously. So there'll always be a kind of three-pronged effort. Us in civil society will have to continue putting pressure on in the investment community, mining companies, and the government to behave in a responsible fashion, and so that we create an institutional environment that really does incentivize good behavior. And in addition, we need to strengthen civil society to stand up to abuse. And if we create enough of a groundswell on the latter, then we also incentivize better behavior at the higher levels, if you like.
And Dr. Harvey, I'm almost out of time, but if we can really look at the issue of COVID-19 and how it has exposed that there isn't really compliance in some instances, because I spoke to one union here on the show in recent weeks who was telling us that there's not even inspectors that come in to ensure there's compliance even underground or compliance even as, people are being screened. Are you finding that this is also a big problem?
Yeah, Bongiwe, look, I think, COVID has exposed inadequacies in the system in multiple sectors, and the mining industry is probably not alone. But what it does show us is that we cannot continue to rely on inspectors and that kind of oversight. This responsible behavior actually has to become embedded in the ethos of companies. It has to be something that from the leadership down to your local shaft manager has to take these kind of things seriously and not just get away with minimum compliance. That's never going to serve us, because COVID has shown us that actually we're not going to we just don't have enough policemen. We actually have to onboard the principles of looking after people. And frankly, until that happens, we're going to continue to face the resource curse, not only in South Africa, but across the continent. And we at Good Governance Africa are continuing the good fight of faith to ensure that responsible governance becomes embedded in how business is done in the mining sector, especially.
All right. Thank you so much for your time tonight. We appreciate it. That's Dr. Ross Harvey from Good Governance Africa.